Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Juan's World, and this will be the last episode in the Unpacking Christmas series, because Wednesday is Twelfth Night and Thursday is Epiphany, and that marks the end of the Christmas season, at least ecclesiastically. And then we're going to start journeying towards Lent and Easter, and so I'm going to change on Friday to Unpacking Easter, starting with Carnival, because Carnival picks up as soon as Epiphany is over. So let's today talk about the traditions associated with Twelfth Night and Epiphany. Now, there are supposedly 12 days of Christmas, and in fact, the 12 days of Christmas were originally instituted by King Alfred the Great, King of England, or King of the Anglo-Saxons, or something of that order. It's a little bit murky, but he's not necessarily the first King of England, but he's in the mix. Before him there were a lot of smaller kingdoms, and he kind of pulled them all together because he was fighting against the Danish, who had taken over large portions of eastern England, an area that became known as Danelaw, and was governed by Danish kings such as Knut, very famous king, usually in English called Canute, but his Danish pronunciation or Norse pronunciation is more like Knut. Gives us various names of places, people and things that begin with kn, like knight and knife, which we have changed to night and knife by removing the initial k sound, because the kn doesn't sit well in English phonology. So Alfred the Great began the policy of giving everybody 12 days holiday, starting with Christmas, and then they had to go back to work. Now, if you count the 12 days of Christmas, they end on January 5th. So that is if you count Christmas Day itself, which you should. The first day of Christmas is Christmas Day, so 25, 26, 27, 20, and so on, and you get to January 5th, which is 12th night. And at one time, 12th night was a big holiday. It was certainly in Regency times. That's in the time when the future King George IV took over for his father, King George III, because he was ill, both physically and mentally. And the Regency period was a very important formative period in English history. And having elaborate parties and banquets on Twelfth Night was very much part of Regency tradition, as you can see in some of these images. And a 12th cake was a most important component of the 12th night celebration. The 12th cake, very much like a Christmas cake, very dense, almost black, certainly very dark fruit cake, covered in marzipan, then covered in royal icing, and then decorated. And there are various ways to decorate them, including the simplest, which is what I normally do, as you can see here, covering everything in marzipan on the top, some royal icing, and then 12 marzipan balls around the edges, representing the 12 days of Christmas, but also the 12 months of the year. But there's also many, many more elaborate ones, and I'll show you some images here that are well beyond my capacity. Although they're not all handcrafted, we have molds from Regency and Victorian times where icing could be placed in the molds until it's set, and then they'd be turned out and placed on the cakes. They didn't have to have a royal icing sculptor at hand or be good at royal icing sculpting yourself. You could mold them. Right. Now this kind of cake is good for Christmas. It's good for Twelfth Night. Also, typically in England was the wedding cake of choice. And the reason for that is that it keeps a very long time. And at one time, I'm not sure that they do it anymore, but at one time in England, when people got married, they would cut the cake and distribute it to the guests. But there were also guests that were invited and couldn't make it. And at one time, the post office used to actually make these little cardboard packages that you could put it was a square package, and the slice had to be square, but you could put a square slice of wedding cake into the package and send it off to the people who couldn't make it. And of course, the wedding cake, following the architecture of Christopher Wren's tower at St. Bride's in London, is a stacked tower of cakes, all decorated with marzipan and royal icing. And the top tier was typically kept by the couple for 1 year, and then they shared it out on their first anniversary. And these kinds of cakes, as I've mentioned in other videos, are perfectly capable of being stored at room temperature, provided it's not too hot, for a year. You have to feed them with brandy every so often, but that's about all. Now, I've got my 12th cake ready to decorate, and I made it last year and didn't eat it. I had every intention of eating it, and then got to 12th Night too full, and so I said, okay, I'll keep it. And so I've kept it in brandy for a year, and I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen, because I've still got half my Christmas pudding left. I've still got mince pies left. I've got all kinds of things, so I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'll think about it in the next few days. And I'm making this video on Monday the 3rd, so I've got 3 days to fully contemplate my fate with cakes before we get there. So that's 12th Night. But Epiphany is the next day. Epiphany is January 6th, and it's the day that celebrates the arrival of the Magi. And the oddity for me, and I'm not entirely sure how it came about, but Epiphany and 12th Night tend now to be confused. And so a person would not normally celebrate both 12th Night and Epiphany. They'd celebrate 12th Night or Epiphany. And so a lot of people on Epiphany have a 12th cake. And you can justify it sort of by saying, well, Christmas is not the first day of Christmas, which is a little bit bizarre, but you can say there's Christmas and then the 26th is the first day, and if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way to 12, then you get to Epiphany. Well, that's a little cheating, but you see, Epiphany is really a church service and ceremony, not a secular one, but it's been adopted by some secular people, not a lot. Most people by now have taken their decorations down, thrown out the Christmas tree, and got back to work and gone on with life. But that's because they started too soon. I mean, if you start getting a tree and erecting it on the 1st of December or earlier, like right after Thanksgiving, by the time you get to Christmas, it's already getting kind of old. And then you've got New Year and it's really old, and so you just want to move on. But if you did what I did and you decorated in the 3rd week of Advent a little bit, and then gradually more and more, even by now it's not old. It still feels fresh. By Epiphany, I'll be ready to move on. But I'm okay for now. So for most people, Epiphany and or Twelfth Night, depending on how you count it, represents the day when you take down the decorations and start thinking about what's coming next. Well, we'll talk about that next time. What's coming next is Carnival. And I should also show you this, which is from Louisiana, but we also have them in Argentina. It's called a Rosca de Reyes. Is a king's ring or a king's crown. And these actually start being sold in places like New Orleans on Epiphany, and they continue to be sold all throughout Carnival. And the ones in New Orleans have a little plastic baby Jesus, and when you buy them, they come with the baby Jesus just kind of on the top. But what it allows you to do is to tuck it inside so that the person who gets the piece with the baby Jesus in it is got good fortune, which is not so very different from some of the traditions of the 12th cake. The 12th cake is normally baked with a bean inside it, and the person who gets the bean in their portion is the king of the feast for the night. Now, I did this once. I had a lot of people over and baked a special 12th cake and with a bean in it, and there were enough of us that I could actually distribute the cake to everybody. And so everybody ate their cake, and we got to the end of it, and I said, well, who got the bean? And they also looked at one another and said, what bean? And I said, well, I told you before we started that one of you would have a bean. And finally, one of my friends who was sitting next to me, young woman, said, oh, is that what it was? I thought it was a really hard raisin. So, no, it was like a red bean. I guess she just crunched on it and thought, oh, that's odd. And there were no nuts in the cake, so there's no confusing the beans and the nuts. She just chewed down on the bean and just ignored it. So there are ways of doing more complicated things. Because in the Christmas pudding, it was a tradition to either put silver tokens, or in my youth, some people would put sixpences, which are nickel silver. They stopped doing that because people kept choking on them, and they thought it was not a good idea. But my mum used to do it, but she was pretty obvious about it. She didn't actually put any money in the pudding itself when it was cooking. She kept a couple of sixpences in her pocket, and when she was like parceling out the pudding to everybody else, she'd slip a little sixpence into mine, but she wouldn't like hide it completely. She'd show a little bit of it so that I knew that it was there, so I didn't put it in my mouth and eat it. So anyway, those are the general traditions associated with Twelfth Night and or Epiphany. And the last one, which was pretty commonly carried out by my mother, although the rest of us didn't really care for it, but I do it now, partly in honor of her and partly because it seems like a good thing to do, is to make up a plate on Epiphany that is a little sampler of everything that you've had throughout the Christmas season, as much as you can. I mean, obviously, like for example, I don't have any duck; it's all gone. I've still got some fish. In fact, I had some fish soup for breakfast this morning. I've got a little bit of chocolate. I've got a little bit of pudding. Well, more than a little bit. Mince pie, odds and ends like that, including I always get a package of 12 violet and rose creams from England, from my sister there. I've loved them for a long time, and every year she sends me a pack of 12, and every year I eat one each day for the 12 days of Christmas. Just so the last one is ready for my Epiphany plate. I don't have my Epiphany plate ready yet because it's only the 3rd, so I've still got a lot to go, but I'll show you this one which I made some years ago. It's just a token. So you take down the decorations, or if that seems like too much. I mean, if for example, my mother on Epiphany would take down a token in preparation for taking everything else down the next day, but she'd take something down just to show that the season was ended. I'll probably do better than that because I don't have that much up. I'll deconstruct my Advent wreath and pile up all the sweets somewhere, and put the lights away and put the tinsel away. There's not much really that I've been decorating with, so it really won't take me that long. That will happen Epiphany evening, and I'll have my Epiphany plate, and then I'll be ready for Carnival. But I'll also want to talk at some point, I think probably a week from today, because the first Monday after Epiphany is called Plow Monday in England. And I just love this idea. Plow Monday is the first Monday after Epiphany. And it was traditionally the day that the plowmen went back to work to plow the fields. That by early January, second week of January, the fields were not necessarily thawed completely, but they weren't like rock hard frozen, and so they could start plowing. So Plow Monday is traditionally the day that the plowmen all go back to work. So what do? They declare it a holiday, and they spend the day doing nothing, or they spend the day going around with a decorated plow, and doing all kinds of mischief and having fun and so forth. I'll talk about that a week from now. So like Friday, I'm going to start with Carnival. Then Tuesday, I'll do Plow Monday. And there's also Distaff Tuesday, which is the female version of Plow Monday. And then we'll get into the general move towards Shrove Tuesday and Ash Wednesday and start unpacking Easter. Meanwhile, I hope you have a good week. I hope you enjoy the Epiphany season as much as you can, and I will see you on Friday.